Take you back to one of our leading stories now. All South African National Defence Force personnel that were deployed to the Eastern DRC will be out of that country by the end of this month. That's the word from the Defence Department, which says the withdrawal is to allow for political and diplomatic interventions to resolve the security situation after an insurgency by the M23 rebels earlier this year. For more on this, we discuss now what has been achieved by this mission, and to help us with that is Royal Danish Defence College and Stellenbosch University military expert, Professor Thomas Mandrup, who talks to us from Copenhagen this evening. Prof, good evening to you and thank you for your time. A strategic withdrawal, is that what we should take away from this, as I think was earlier said by the Minister of Defence alongside the generals, or is the Defence Force forced to pull out even though peace remains ever so fragile?
Good evening, Zoli, and good evening to the viewers, and thank you for having me. I think, first of all, I think we have to acknowledge that it's a happy occasion that we finally found a situation where to get the troops out of a very, very precarious situation, where they were stuck in their camps in Sake and in Goma, basically being on the mercy of the M23. So that's a very happy occasion for South Africa and for the region, that they managed to negotiate a withdrawal under these circumstances. Then to answer your question, let's basically just talk about what was the objective of the mission. The objective of the mission was to support the Congolese armed forces to, with force, disarm, especially the M23, and basically defeat the M23 and then other rebel forces. Have they managed to do that? Mm-hmm. No, they haven't. M23 has gained ground and has increased its presence and is now basically controlling large areas of North and South Kivu. And basically the SADC mission, SANDF DRC with South African forces, has not been defeated, but they've been confined to their camps after heavy casualties and without the ability of sustaining them and supporting them from the defense force. So that's one thing. The other objective of the mission was, to provide training and support for the Congolese army. That has not happened, and the Congolese army has basically not disintegrated, but they have withdrawn from large scourge of area, despite in having the numerous advantage, being have the force numbers on their side, but they, as a force, they're not coherent force. They are portfolio of different groups, and all that were not well disciplined and all that. So that sense has been a difficult partner. So you say these two objectives have not been reached. Have they managed to get a political settlement? Yes, there's now a political settlement. Is that due to the mission? It would be a long stretch to say that. This is more, I guess, international political pressure. We talked about this before, that we needed international actors to go in and put a lot of pressure on the parties, basically Congo and the Congolese government and the Rwandan government, to find some kind of solution. And then we can talk about who to do that. The EU has been playing a role, the AU has played a role, but the big difference here has been when the Americans, and we can shout out at Trump and not like him very much for various and very good reasons, but one must say that in this situation, the Americans have played a key role here in getting the two parties to the negotiation tables, and maybe especially also getting the Congolese government to accept that they need to speak to the M23. And I think that is maybe important, and that has been one of the key problems with the previous processes we've seen.
Yeah. Professor, we saw the casualties in March from the semi-DRC contingent. That's the very contingent that's withdrawing. The generals today placing lots of emphasis, I think General Maphumulo, again and again, talking about this withdrawal is not a sign of weakness. Why do you think he is placing so much emphasis on that, given the 14 soldiers that we as South Africa lost in that in those skirmishes?
Well, I think this right now it's damage control because basically you ended up in a very difficult situation. You did not have the strategic lift capacity. You didn't have the capacity to actually sustain and provide logistics for the trapped troops up there. You couldn't put in reinforcements because you didn't have the capacity to do so. But this is not the main problem. The main problem is, as we talked about before, that this mission was given a task that was impossible with the means provided. So basically, you sent in a SANDF force without the needed air support, without the needed insubmission logistical capacity, without the needed capabilities on the ground, and without the needed camp protection, and strategically was badly planned and all that, and you didn't have the forces that was needed because at the time we have to remember when you deployed the force for the first time, you also had troops in Mozambique at the time. So you had to put together a force, and that was from a defense force that has been neglected and been caught financially caught by the politicians year after year since 1994, and now is in a terrible situation. So basically, this actually opens up for a possibility actually to have this very needed debate about what kind of defense force do we need for the future? What is it? What kind of roles do we need for it to play, both in Africa but also domestically, where it now is a major support for the police and protection of borders and all these kind of things. So there's this possibility, instead of looking at, say, okay, and trying to save face here, because there's no face to save. This was there was a mission that was badly executed and the politicians did not provide the SANDF with the needed resources to actually give it a chance to that. So I feel very sorry for the soldiers. But this is actually, let's move beyond that and say, okay, let's have a chance now. Sit down, say what kind of defense, how much money do we have to spend on defense? And what do we need, and then try to make these two ends meet and design a defense force that actually fits that kind of purpose. Eh?
Professor, I'm trying to move on from this point, but you drag me back into it because you keep asking these pertinent questions about. No, it's a very important question you are prompting. That what kind of a defense force? I'm going to be deliberately internal to South Africa. What kind of a defense force do we need? And these battles, if you look at the CAR and now Eastern DRC, we have lost casualties here, and it's not a good look on the South African National Defense Force. And this is an army that was looked upon by the region with envy many years ago. So what is it that can be done to reinvigorate this military?
The thing is, of course, and this is the sad part. We had a defense review done in 2015. It came up with very excellent recommendations. But the problem was that the framework and then catastrophic Zuma government at the time gave the guidelines was never they promised that the defense force would get 2% of the GDP. That is not going to happen because Africa cannot afford that at the moment. And one could also say is that the right way to use defense resources. So you created a defense review at that stage which did not fit the reality because the politicians gave them a false promise and a false framework for that kind of agreement. But put that aside. What is needed now is that there is a need to define what kind of a task is it that the defense force is supposed to undertake. Do we want the defense force? We have a constitutional obligations of the defense force. Some political military analysts have argued, and some from inside the SANDF has said itself, that right now the SANDF is not really capable of fulfilling all these kind of constitutional objectives. So that maybe be a start. So, okay, what is the constitutional objective and public obligations of the force? We need to fill that. To what extent do we want to continue this slippery slope where we continuously use military assets to provide and to do police tasks domestically? Is that the right way to go? It's not. And we know from the literature and all that, that's the wrong way to go. And it's, of course, a symptom of a failing police force that requires then use the defense force. And that's very, very bad for the defense force military abilities to actually to do the job. And then there's the final question: to what extent can South Africa, should South Africa actually play a role regionally? And I know the NC has said that we obliged to play a role, constructive role, to creating peace in Africa and all these kind of things, which is very beautiful thoughts, but then that costs money.
Yeah.
And that needs so you need to give that kind of investments, and you need to have that kind of debate. So you need to prioritize your resources, and you need to resize the force. And I can talk long about this, but South Africa also has a defense force, and now the general is going to be very angry with me, but it's a very top-heavy defense force. Too many generals, they're expensive. Too many cars, fancy cars, and all the stories, all these kind of things. You need to slim the defense force, be an efficient, lean organization with a lot of young recruits coming in, with a more leaner leadership structures, but you need to have that kind of debate, and to redesign that. And my question is the current political leadership, because that needs to come from the political leadership, tell the defense force, get yourself in order. And I'm feeling very sorry for the individual soldiers, because when I work at the military academy, when I see people there, I see committed, capable personnel that wants to do a job and wants to do something good, and they're not being given the tools to do that at the moment.
Finally, Professor, we can't forget that the two leaders here, Paul Kagame and Felix Tshisekedi, their first meeting was not on the continent, although efforts had been made to have these two finally come face to face. That was achieved in Qatar, far away from the continent of Africa. Was that a reflection on the AU and the sub-regional bodies, or was it a reflection on one of the two leaders? Because Kagame was visible in almost all of these meetings that took place regionally. It was Tshisekedi who just could not be seen.
Yeah, I think that's a long debate around that. That's, first of all, I think to have effective peace negotiations, you need a neutral kind of a broker, and then Qatar plays that role excellently, and they've done that elsewhere as well. We've seen that in the Middle East as well. So that's one thing, and then you get the Americans on top that put pressure on the two parties on that. So that helps a lot. But it tells you, to answer your question, it's quite clearly that the regional organization SADC has been on the Tshisekedi side. East African community increasingly, with Uganda and Kenya and others, been on the side of Rwanda. So that sense is what very difficult for them, even though they tried to negotiate and coordinate what they were doing. It's very difficult for them to find a solution that was acceptable to everybody. Then you have to accept also that there is a domestic political scene in Congo where Tshisekedi is under increased pressure, which is why you see all these kind of political statements around former President Kabila and his relations with M23 and Rwanda. So there's a lot of things going on there at the same time, which makes Tshisekedi very vulnerable for potential military coup and others. So there's a lot of things going on at that side, and that's why he can't be seen as losing face. So Qatar playing that role, Congo going to the Americans, making a mineral deal, and these kind of things, what we see right now. And again, the US going to Rwanda to get a deal on the refinement of natural precious metals, which Rwanda has the technique to do, and all these kind of things. That actually creates a framework where you have a strong international power, superpower, the global superpower, going in, playing that role. And that is maybe the thing that could make this maybe possible for this to have some kind of success, because it puts so much pressure on the two parties. But in the region, on the continent at the moment, the political tension is too high that they would be able to have a successful negotiation, unfortunately.
Yeah. Professor Thomas Mandrup, thank you very much for helping us make sense of this situation. He is with the Royal Danish Defence College and Stellenbosch University, a military expert.